All right. Hey, Genesis 7. Genesis 7. We're going to get through the rest of 7 today because there's a lot of these things are recaps a little bit. And actually into a little bit of 8. And Genesis chapter 7. And we're going to come in at verse 13 because we left off with verse 12, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And what you're going to read in 13 through 16 is really a recap of 7 through 10. It's a recap of 7 through 10. And there are some things that we're sure about, or seems to be we were sure about, and then some things that are kind of convoluted in it that we aren't given full clarity. In the selfsame day, entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, they're the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. I had never really thought about the miraculous part of this as far as drawing these animals from all over the world to him. It's not like Noah's going out catching these things. He's busy building an ark. So he's got to have these animals coming to the ark. And there's no telling what kind of animal. Maybe there's tremendous changes even to what we see today. Obviously it's not every dog is not represented. You've got a wolf or whatever it is that represents all the species everything that goes within that. With cattle, the same way. So you've got everything that's represented there. The one class of animal that is omitted, the amphibian or the aquatic animal. And obviously most of those would have been swimming, but you've got some that would have been on land, could go back and forth. That would include the reptiles. It doesn't say that they are represented there. The Lord shuts him in so that it's impossible for Noah to get out. Always a picture of us in the ark. And Pastor Jeff went through that. He did a really good study of the ark a number of years back. I recall that from. Verse 17. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lift up above the earth, and the waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven. That shows you that it's not just a local flood area. This is under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. Now, to be fair, we do not know what the landscape looked like at this time. It does reference mountains, but it doesn't reference how high. We know that eventually it's going to land on Mount Ararat. We don't know how high it was at that time. When they do land, it's going to be at about 16,000 feet, which creates a number of different thoughts for me. I was thinking about, you go to Denver and you try to breathe and it's different than down here. Imagine when you're even higher up in that higher elevation. I don't know how it worked. But they survived it. So we don't know the sizes necessarily of the mountains, but the earth convulses. This is wild. You would have had to have massive tidal waves going around the world. I was reading some on tidal waves. They've had some tidal waves that they had the water measured in speed at 430 miles per hour. That was just on some tidal waves that they have measured before. Imagine this happening all around the world as this water's coming in, and it would have completely changed the landscape of everything that you see. Where, if you've ever seen where those tidal waves come through, everything is gone. You have some trees that are left standing back behind, but there's a lot of catastrophic change to the landscape. Crevices opening up 50 to 200 miles long and a mile deep. Volcanoes erupting, shooting land masses into the air. I remember watching the first time I ever saw when that volcano went off in Washington back in the early 80s. And you see that whole mountaintop just explode and go up. And ash and debris is up in the air 30,000 feet above us. Pretty amazing when you thought about that. By the way, now it's not going to have the flooding, but all of these things besides that part of it, you're going to have massive catastrophic change at the second advent of Christ. I was looking through some of these verses that went along with this. Turn over at the second advent of Christ. So we've had the first advent. He comes as a baby. He's not coming back as a baby at the second advent. He's coming back like he looked at the Mount of Transfiguration with Peter, James, and John when Moses and Elijah are up there with him. That's the way he's coming back at that point. Isaiah 13:13. Let's go over and take a look at that. I should have printed some of these verses, but I didn't, so I'm going to have to find them myself. Mark, maybe you can find it for me. Isaiah 13:13. Read that for me, please.
Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger.
So all of Isaiah 13 is dealing with the second advent of Christ. What you see on 13, read that one more time.
Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger.
What it seems to intimate is that you're literally going to have a changing of the earth from off of its axis, where it's spinning it's so consistent right now that literally you're going to have this shift. The shaking is literally going to break it off just briefly, or maybe for whoever knows how much time. But you're going to have any time of convulsion within the earth, something comparatively to this right here. Turn over to chapter 24 of Isaiah. Isaiah 24. Isaiah 24. I got to turn and look at him because I got to know what I'm looking at. Isaiah 24, go down to verse 18. And it shall come to pass that he who fleeth from the noise of the fear shall fall into the pit, and he that cometh up out of the midst of the pit shall be taken in the snare. For the windows from on high are open. Does that sound familiar? Remember in Genesis, what we just read in 7? When the windows of heaven were open? You got it happening again. Part 2. Actually, it would be part 3, because if Genesis 1, 1, and 2 were that same concept, then you've got this being the third time. And the foundations of the earth do shake. Anybody in here been through a real earthquake? I'm not talking about like what some things everybody says Alabama has an earthquake here and South Carolina's had a couple little small things. But like literally South Carolina, or like California, anybody been in here with something like that? Have you? How was it like?
Colombia. It was really bad. I mean, that whole city just went.
Did it? How old were you?
Early 20s.
Okay, so you have a distinct memory. Like frightening, like to the level, or did you feel relatively safe where you were, or?
Where I was pretty safe. It was safe.
But there were parts of it that had major damage and stuff from it. I remember watching during baseball season one time back in, maybe the late 80s. And they had the earthquake that hit during the World Series. I want to say it was the Giants and the A's playing. And interstates, roads were just like completely just snapped, and cars just crushed underneath it everywhere. That's just on that local level. This is not what we're looking at here is not local. Even in Genesis 7, you're talking about worldwide destruction. What you're looking at in Isaiah 13, what you're looking at in Isaiah 24 is worldwide cataclysmic changes to the structure of the earth. Look at that. This is going to be during the second advent of Christ. At the end, you got your end of the tribulation, boom. When he's making remember, if we drew it on the board, we would have the rapture and then your 7 years of tribulation. By the way, all this stuff going on over in Syria, big deal. If you're not familiar, if you didn't pay much attention to it last night, I don't know if Assad was in the plane that crashed, but his son is an interesting guy. Syria's the head of Syria, they've been in power for 61 years of a dictatorship. His guy coming, remember, there's a couple things about the Antichrist. I'm not saying that this is him definitively or in any way, but Assad's son is Syrian, obviously. He's very, very effeminate. And one of the things of the Antichrist is going to be that they have no interest in women. The person doesn't like women for whatever reason. And this guy would be the next one coming up on the scene. And he said, certainly not saying, I'm just trying to look at some pieces as they're moving around. Well, what happened they literally overthrew Damascus last night. The rebels came in and took Damascus. It's pretty big thing could be on the map of prophetic things to come. But I wanted to keep reading here. Let's keep reading. Verse 19. The earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. The earth is removed exceedingly. This is verse 19 of chapter 24, Isaiah. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. That means that earth is just, not just in one little area of the earth, not in one little region. The entire earth is going to be reeling like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, and it shall fall and not rise again. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall punish the hosts of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. And they shall be gathered together, and as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days shall they be visited. You've got some wild stuff happening right there. Go over to Psalm chapter 82. Psalm chapter 82. Go down to verse 5. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in the darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course. So you've got different verses that reference this concept of the earth literally coming off of its axis and the destruction that's going to take place. Probably was a lot like that during the flood of Noah's day. I want you to see something also. Go over to Revelation 6. Revelation chapter 6. Revelation chapter 6, go down to verse 14. And this is another account of the ending of the tribulation. Now you're jumping to the end of the tribulation. Okay? And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, And every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Every mountain and island. You don't want to be in Australia. You don't want to be wherever else. They have Hawaii. Better get back home. And the kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men. Always follow that rich men during the tribulation. There's a reason why James is loaded with stuff about rich people. Remember, you're going into, once you leave Paul's writings and you're starting to edge toward that tribulation time. Is there anything wrong with being rich? No, there's nothing wrong with being rich right now. But once you go into this time frame of where you're heading into the tribulation and you have people that are wealthy, their wealth has come because of those that they have taken advantage of and those that have not received the mark or that have received the mark of the beast. The only way you're getting wealthy once you're heading into that tribulation time frame is you have taken the mark of the beast. Remember, if you don't take the mark of the beast, you cannot buy, you cannot trade, you cannot do anything. So, as you go into this time frame, remember you go into Matthew even, and Matthew says, the guy says, or they say, when did we help you, God? When did we? And he says, when you took care of those without, when you clothed those that didn't have anything. And that's a direct reference to the Jews going through the tribulation. But it's the whole concept of wealthy people later on. When you go into James and you start seeing this, remember, you're on bridge books. So as you don't build your doctrine on bridge books, and your bridge books primarily are Matthew, Acts, and Hebrews. So when you've got this time frame of there, you've got the wealthy people coming out. So that's what it's referencing when we have here. I probably convoluted everything to you when I just said that, but that's okay. Let's keep reading. The kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men and the chief captains and the mighty men and every bondman and every free man hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. That doesn't even make sense. When have you ever seen a lamb that's anything but gentle and afraid? That's a capital L. You're looking at God, that Jesus Christ returning into that same point where he's at the Mount of Transfiguration, where it's blowing these guys' minds are seeing him. His hair is the white as raiment. All this stuff about him, that's what he's going to be looking at right there. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? Okay, so a lot of similarities between Noah's day there with the catastrophic stuff going on. Remember, to this point, it has never rained, it's never thundered, never had lightning. And you can imagine the first time that those things took place, the fear that would have gone over anybody. I've been out here in Florida and I'm around it all the time. And there's been times when I'm literally, if I need to get something in the front yard and I had to go get it before the rain starts and all this, and you're running and all of a sudden that lightning and thunder pop and you're like, whew, and you're trying to get back inside under the cover before, I mean, that's with us hearing it and seeing it frequently. So when the door is shut, it's shut. There's a verse in Matthew 25:10 that talks about when the 10 virgins are there and some of them don't have their oil and they go away, and it says they come back and it says the door was shut. Couldn't get back in. Turn over to Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs 1. I've been trying to go back through Proverbs a little bit more lately, but I've not been doing a great job of it. But there's some interesting verses here in chapter 1. Proverbs chapter 1. Go down to 22. It says, how long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? and the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn you at my reproof. There's this concept that God is love and that he will never judge anyone. That's the whole concept. Oh, it's impossible. I was at a wedding, I was at a funeral last year for, I was at a funeral. And this guy that was up there giving the sermon or eulogy or whatever included this phrase. He's the pastor, and he's talking, and he's got his gown on, and he's got his hands clasped, and he says, guys, I know there's been a lot of people telling you that some people will be in heaven and some people will not be in heaven. He goes, relax. He says, you're all going to be there. You're all going to be there. Let me tell you something. That's not what the Bible teaches at all. It says that God has wrath and he has judgment. And unless you come to accept what his plan of correction is, you're in trouble. Okay, so let's keep reading here. How long, ye simple ones, will ye have simplicity, and the scorners delight in the scorning, and fools hate knowledge? Turn you at my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you, because I have called, and ye refused. I have stretched out my hand, and no man regarded. But ye have set at naught all my counsel, and with none of my reproofs, that you would not listen to me. Just like Noah, back during the time he's preaching for this 120 years. The Bible says he preached righteousness to these people over and over and over. Look at verse 26. If this is the God that everybody draws up in their minds. I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. That doesn't sound like a very nice guy right there. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you, then shall they call upon my name. There's a problem. When you're reading in 28, it's too late. Too late. Then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. For they that hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. I hit this with kids at our school all the time. That fear of the Lord, it's not talking about respect. I remember hearing so many people say, oh yeah, the fear of the Lord is just talking about respecting God. No. It's fear of God. When a person can, now we all have issues with sin from time to time in our lives. But there is a difference between having sin that you're ashamed of and sin that you openly flaunt in front of people. There is a massive divide between the two. And if you can live your life in a way where you are openly living in sin with zero regard for what God thinks about it, you're in a bad place. That's what you've got right here. For they that hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, they would none of my counsel. They despised all my reproof. Look at this. Therefore shall they eat of the fruit of their own way and be filled with their own devices. For the turning away the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. But look at verse 33. Here's your hope. But whoso hearkeneth unto me shall dwell safely and shall be quiet from fear of evil. That would have been perfect for whoever would have listened to what Noah was trying to tell them. He is only love and mercy when it comes to judgment, when you accept his plan of rescue. Sodom and Gomorrah, no mercy shown to man, women, children. Think back to with this thing with Noah. I was talking to Mr. Kierlieber the other day. Brad goes to our school here, and his dad owns some restaurants and some things down the beach. And he said that he and 2 or 3 other boys stayed at the hotel that he owns the night that Helena, when all the water came in. And I said, were you pretty afraid? He goes, Joe, I've never experienced anything like that. And you're talking about water that was 3 or 4 feet deep, guys. And he said, I've never experienced fear like that ever in my life. Sharon had a picture of one of her friends had posted to Facebook, Kelly Seapost. She hasn't seen her in a long time, but they used to be friendly through the church. And she posted a picture of these waves. Her door was closed, and the waves were coming up to about the middle of the door, and the door had the windows panes in it. So you could see the water coming up and hitting. And I remember just watching it. And I was just like, if I were in that house, the fear that I would have of just 3 foot of water coming in. Imagine what they had to experience there. It had to be pretty amazing. And I was also thinking about when people tell you over and over to avoid trouble. Remember they would get on the TV when I'm watching Dennis. What's his name on channel ABC? Dennis. Everybody knows. He wears the suspenders. And then they would come across. They would interview the policemen and the firemen from the little peninsulas here, and they would inevitably say this right here, guys. Now's the time to get out. Now's the time to get out. Now there's going to come a time. You can finish that. What they said for that? When nobody's coming to save you, and we'll see you on the other side of this thing. You need to listen right now. You need to hear and act now. That's what I thought of. There will be a time when you can't get there to help them anymore. Mountains were covered, whatever those mountains looked like. I was thinking also possibly that the seabed rose. Could have been some of the water that how it moved all around. Verse 21. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life. Of all that was in the dry land died. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle and the creeping things and the fowl of the heaven. This is where you know that it was a universal flood. If it's not a universal flood, the birds would have just flown to another region where they could land. But it doesn't say that. The fowls all died too. All the birds, everybody. And they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So the flood obliterates everything. If you require breath and you can't sustain in the water, you're dead. Only Noah and his family remains. After 2 weeks, the water would have been at about, if it's coming in at 6 inches per minute, it would have been at 10,000 feet. That's after 2 weeks. So if you extrapolate that into 40 days, you can see where you'd be with that. After 40 days, the rain stops. The Holocaust is over in the sense of everybody that's on the earth is dead. And the ark is probably floating somewhere around the Asia Minor area as the waters just lifted up off of the earth. Had it been a local flood even, think about this, how stupid the concept is. The ark would have then gone to still wherever the lowest level of water would have been. So it would have, even if it were local, it would have gone down and then eventually ended up in a lower body of water. So the concept that this is, and I've read a number of guys that try to say, oh, there's a possibility there was a local flood. It's just like, that is not what this is referencing. It's not what it's referencing. Let's jump over to chapter 8. I told you we were going to get into chapter 8 a little bit. And God remembered Noah And every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. Now, when it says God remembered Noah, it's not saying that he had forgotten about him. That's not what it's referencing. There's a couple of places in the Bible, I'm going to show you a couple of them here, where when it's referencing remembering, it's saying that he is getting ready to bless them. One of the places is Genesis 19. Go over to Genesis 19. Genesis 19, and this place is where I believe it's Abraham. It may have been right up Sodom and Gomorrah too. Let me see for sure. Genesis chapter 19, and go down to verse 29. Yep, this is after Sodom. Verse 29. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, which he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. So you've got him coming back to mind. He's sending Lot eventually over there with him. Genesis 30 has the same thing. I'm not going to go looking at it there, but I want to say that that's where Rachel was without children, and she had wanted a child really badly. And the Bible says that God remembered her and allowed her to have a child. So if you include Genesis 1 and chapter 7 and 8, you've got two massive changes to the atmosphere that have taken place on the earth that we know of it. Changes in the cosmic rays, deterioration of mass, breakdown of chemicals. This radically alters the earth. In fact, you're going to begin to see one of the things that's obvious to everybody is the decline in the age of people that follows immediately after this. So if you're familiar with what scientists do, they try to give you they try to age things, and they use carbon-14 and all these different things. The problem is they're dealing with a moving target. They have no idea what it was like previous to the flood. They can only go by what they know of now. And yet they're going to try to give you something definitive on these years and all this stuff. And I think of the verse that comes to my mind is 1 Corinthians 1:27. Now you don't need to turn over there if you want to. I'll read it, but it's a great verse. It says, "But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty." So you've got all these smart people. There's no doubt God's given them intellects that are above the average person in most cases. There's some of these people that are truly, truly brilliant. He makes them like that. I think about even when he was having Solomon build the temple. And there were a few men that he brought that had specific gifts with metal and carpentry and all these things. So God certainly does gift certain people with certain abilities to understand things and do things. But the scientists are limited to understanding the age and origin of the earth. And when you compare it, their methods that they use are really archaic. And they've shown how they're like circular reasoning, where they end up canceling each other out, but they won't acknowledge that, so they keep digging themselves deeper. Let's take a look at those verses, though, 1 through 3, because I think we're going to get further than that. Well, we are going to get a little bit further. Look at this verse in verse 2. The fountains of the deep, there's the deep again. You got to be careful with this. The deep, we're talking about the fountains of the deep opening up. The windows of heaven were stopped. And the rain from heaven was restrained. You're looking at different things here. Fountains of the deep, windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain of heaven was restrained. These are different actions within that sentence right there, within that verse right there. And it seems to be that at this point right here, you have the beginning also of the process of evaporation, of how we know that Solomon's familiar with it because he talks about it. But it seems to be that this is the first beginning of it where you have this process of condensation, evaporation, water going up from the ocean, moves over into the clouds, falls, and just you have this process over and over and over again. From what we see, this is probably where it begins at this point right here. We don't know how big the bodies of water were before. We don't know if it was one massive body of water that surrounded one piece of land. That's the idea. If most people say that it broke apart after Peleg, but Noah's great-great-grandson, I believe. If that happened, then the waters would have created, you would have had the seas and the oceans being created even as those pieces were moving apart, but we don't really know. Verse 4, and the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. So the boat's floating above everything, and then as the water begins to recede, it lodges itself onto Mount Ararat. They still can't see water, but the bottom of the boat is lodged there, and then the water begins to recede, and eventually the tops of the mountains, they can see those around them. Verse 6, and it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. And he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her unto him into the ark. So they've been on the ark now over 300 days. By the time you put this thing together, the amount of time from the rain to the floating to the water receding, they've been on this thing for 300 days. Can you imagine that probably by this point, the human nature doesn't change? It's bad. You got all these animals. You got probably brothers fighting with each other, sister-in-laws fighting with each other, moms, husbands fighting with wives, the whole nine. It's got to be pretty rough then. They send the black raven out. By the way, this is still considered an ominous bird even today. Whether you got Edgar Allan Poe writing his book, the raven is still considered just kind of an ominous bird. If you think of the word, if somebody's ravenous, they're starving, they just tear at food when they're just have to get it. Saying about the word ravine. At Liberty University, where I went to school there, they had this big ravine over there. It was just this big gash in the ground that was not very attractive. All these words that kind of affiliate and associate with that. As opposed to a dove, which is a picture of peace. United Nations tries to use that thing all the time. And what do they put in its mouth? Olive branch, straight from the Bible. They have all that. That's where we're going to stop, guys. I wanted to get at least through that right there, through verse 9 of chapter 8. A lot of this is some good reading, though. If you haven't had a chance to read through it in a while, go back and read through a little bit of this. And then just even Google some of the stuff some of these scientists come up with. It's really interesting to hear their perspective on some of these things. Any questions before we close this thing up? Yes, ma'am.
Talking about the lamb in Revelation 8, have you ever seen a lamb be
aggressive?
But that lamb in Revelation has a capital L.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that this is not your typical lamb per se. This is Jesus Christ coming back as the lamb that's going to be a lion. and going to rule with an iron fist. So much, much different than the lambs that we know of.
Hey, Joe.
Yes, sir.
What's the deal with the raven never coming back?
That's an interesting thing because he goes, and the Bible just says he goes to and fro. It's a picture of Satan going to and fro on the earth, seeking who he can devour. But it's never a good thing. And what you have there by the ravens, what you're going to see when you get into studying, especially into Matthew, when Jesus Christ is teaching, he uses birds as a picture of false spirits, of demonic spirits. Raven is certainly would fall within that. Even within the dove, you've got the ability to be a counterfeit, which you see with the United Nations today, how they're going to use those things. But later on, you're going to have one of the parables that he talks about are the birds that are in the trees. And those birds that are in the trees are all demonic, false teaching, false teachers. They all lumped into, and he uses the raven and those birds like that. So, all right, let me pray. We'll get you guys out. Thank you, Father, for this day. Thank you for your word. Help us to be in it this week. Thank you for this time of the year where we can just focus Thanksgiving last week, and then now as we think about your first advent coming to this earth, our only hope through you, Jesus. Just be with us this week as we go through our daily lives. Help us to take any opportunity we have to give the good news to somebody. And I thank you for your goodness to each one of us. In Jesus' name, amen.